Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For those of us joining, you're currently on mute and hidden cameras so we can focus on the speakers. We're very glad that you can join us today on a cybersecurity webinar. Thank you to our event sponsor. We have Michael Baker International and Solutions³ as our sponsors. Here we have facilitators Mike Battistella, who is with Solutions³. It's their 20th anniversary last year, July 2023. They're focused on cybersecurity, along with IT operations management and IT services management. Mike is a board, multi-advisory boards and institutions, frequent author with the Meadowlands, USA Magazine, and very experienced instructor. Very thankful for him to help organizing with everybody here. Great panel of speakers.
Great, David. Thank you for setting this up and allowing us to put a great team together. So we're going to go through a number of areas, and as you're hearing the speakers, keep this in mind. What we really wanted to do is tell the story. What's happening out there. What do we need to be aware of, and what is the government really asking of their federal contractors? And we know that federal eventually leads to state and local, and then across commercial and all of that stuff. So if you're not involved in federal, this is still going to be very informative for you. But we want to, kind of address those requirements that folks are going to have to, work around and be in compliance with. And as a federal contractor, we're going to hit some of the FAR requirements and the DFAR requirements that are expected when it comes to contracts. So we have a specialist here talking about that. But then, a lot of organizations, they get to the point where they meet their compliance requirement. And let's face it, if there is a compliance requirement, that's a really important milestone to meet that compliance requirement. The thing is, and I think the mistake that's often made, is meeting the compliance requirement doesn't mean the job is finished. That's the beginning point, not the end point. We have to meet that compliance requirement, or we can't do business in that industry, whatever that industry is requiring of us. So we want to talk about what do we do beyond that requirement. And then what we'll do is we'll head into a panel discussion, and you, the audience, will be able to as you have questions. We're going to have an entire 30 minutes of panel time. So put your questions in the chat. David will be monitoring the chat, and as we get into the panel discussions, you'll have opportunity to get those questions answered. If you don't put questions in there, it may be a short discussion. I'd rather that we had a very lively discussion. It's going to be heavily dependent on you, so please do that. So let's kick off this first portion with Krista Valenzuela. She's going to talk about the current state of cybercrime and threats. Krista is the bureau chief for NJCCIC, the New Jersey Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Cell. She's also a graduate of the College of New Jersey. And along with myself and David, we're all three of us are members of the New Jersey SAME hosting this. So, Krista, I'm going to turn it over to you. And, we're going to look for maybe an overview of what the current threats are facing our businesses and maybe some examples of cybercrime.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And thanks everybody for being here this morning. So we'll just go over a couple of key points for the current state of cybercrime, cyber threat activity, what we're seeing. Really focus a little bit on the defense industrial base, the public sector, government. However, as you'll see as I'm going through these points here, this is applicable to really all sectors. It just depends on the way in which they are targeted by certain elements. And so I just wanted to also let you know where my information is coming from. So there's a lot of information that's publicly available, and we, of course, use that information on different cyber threats. But for the NJCCIC, our purview is the executive branch of state government. It's a very large network. It's about 65,000 different endpoints. And so that allows us to have a lot of visibility into the current threats that are out there, trends and tactics. So a lot of the information that we gather and discern about those different areas in cybercrime come from internal resources. But looking at the different types of cybercrime, of course, ransomware, and I have a slide on that. Ransomware really hasn't gone down in the activity that we're seeing. It's still very prevalent. I will go over, though, the different tactics and trends that we're seeing within ransomware, because I think it's important to note. And then for the DIB and for government, doing any kind of government contracting work, those organizations and agencies, those are very valuable targets. They have a lot of sensitive data, and not only about those projects that they might be working on, but also the individuals that work there, the other companies that they work with. and also the different cyber threat groups that are targeting that sector and those sectors. We'll see for some, maybe the commercial sector, a lot of the cyber threat activity is coming from cybercrime syndicates, cyber criminals, financially motivated threat actors. But in these different sectors, we see, there's the nation state threat actors, the state sponsored, which is slightly different. The cyber criminals are still targeting them as well as hacktivists. So we see a wide variety of different cyber crime or cyber threat group types that are targeting this sector as well. And then moving on to cloud, this is something I wanted to make note of, in particular, due to the recent Microsoft incident in which it was their Azure environment that was targeted by, they believe it's called Midnight Blizzard, associated with APT29, which is a advanced persistent threat group out of Russia. And so I wanted to mention that because number one, it's Microsoft. Microsoft got hit with this pretty significant incident. And so if Microsoft can get hit by, cyber threat group, pretty much all of us can. And so cloud in general, though, is likely to be targeted more and more. I'm making that assumption based on what we've seen in the past. So as we start adopting different technologies, whether it's, text messaging, we're seeing a lot of text message based scams as companies start using text messages more often to communicate with their customers, their clients in legitimate purposes. We see the threat actors also utilizing those. Same thing for those QR codes that we see. We see attempts to try to get people to click on malicious ones. As we've gone to the cloud more, we're going to see more and more targeting. We've already seen it over the past several years. A lot of that has to do with misconfigurations. And we tend to put the onus on that victim, like, oh, you didn't properly secure that cloud container and your cloud environment. But it's a give and take. Sometimes it's very difficult to set up those environments in a secure way. Things change all the time. You have to be very cognizant of any changes that are made to the different settings within your cloud environment. And so we'll continue to see a lot of activity there. But then the availability of data. And I mean that in two different ways. The availability of data in your environment that's not properly protected. So we'll get into the trends of ransomware. And part of that is the exfiltration of data. So the stealing of data off of those victim networks. If we're not properly securing that data on our own network, then that cyber threat actor can utilize that to their advantage. They could publicly post it and share it. They could sell that information as well. So not only the availability of that data, that sensitive data, but also the availability of the data of employees and people. We see this all the time, and it kind of leads into that last bullet about social engineering. There's a plethora of information available online, as we all know. If I am a cyber criminal and I want to target an organization or an individual, I can gather quite a bit of information just by a simple Google search and doing some open source intelligence research. And then that gets us into that social engineering component. Still, one of the top attack vectors is some kind of social engineering scheme. And we'll get into an example of that on the next slide. So here I have a couple of examples of the targeting of, this is a specific government. These are government agencies that were targeted and government employees. However, the same techniques and tactics can be applied either to a government contractor or a private or public business. What we see here on the left-hand side, that is something called the My New Jersey portal. Public employees in the state of New Jersey, many of them, utilize this portal to access a lot of sensitive information about your tax information, any payroll information, pay stubs, and then also the pension system is all in this one access point of the My New Jersey portal. At the time, there was a email that circulated, a phishing email that was targeting public employees. And they pretended that they were from the Division of Pensions and Benefits, and that employee needed to click on the link to get into the My New Jersey portal in order to read that document. And so if you clicked on that link, however, you'd be brought to a page that looked like the My New Jersey login page, but was a fraudulent version of it. They had copied the look and feel very accurately to what that login screen looks like. That's actually a fraudulent one that you see on the screen here. It's identical to the one that you would normally go to. The URL, however, was different. So if you did put in your information there and you didn't have multi-factor authentication on your account, that would allow the threat actor to steal your password, access your account. And then what their end goal was in this case was to submit for fraudulent pension loan applications. They could have been paid out those pension loans if we did not catch this fraudulent activity. And so when that happened, we started to look around and we were like, well, I wonder how many other government agencies or state agencies and departments were being impersonated. And we found quite a bit. We called it Project Rabbit Hole because the more we looked, the more we found. And this is not unique to the state of New Jersey. And so you can see these are all examples of the fraudulent web pages that we found. Department of Labor and Workforce Development, that information could be used by a threat actor to access that account and submit for unemployment benefits. And then in the middle here, this is an impersonation of the Motor Vehicle Commission in New Jersey. This one was a little bit different in that they were looking for information, sensitive, personally identifiable information that could be used for identity theft purposes. And so we'll move on to multi-factor authentication. And I mentioned this, and I think we all know what this is at this point. If you're here, you're interested in cybersecurity, you likely at least know what multi-factor authentication is. It's also called two-factor authentication or two-step verification. It's that combination of two factors, is something you know, which is likely going to be a password, something you have, which is probably going to be a code of some sort that's sent to you via various methods, or something you are, which is like a biometric. Oftentimes you're using facial ID or fingerprint. And I wanted to mention here, multi-factor authentication is extremely important to have and to be enabled on all of your accounts. We used to talk about it just being on your sensitive accounts. That's not the case. You need to have it on every account that is offering this. The thing that I need to know here today, though, is when I mentioned before about the cloud, I said, as we start to adopt these technologies, then the threat actor is going to find ways to exploit that. This is what's happening with MFA. These criminals are trying to find ways to bypass multi-factor authentication. And so I'll go over better methods of MFA as we go through these. But these are some examples of how they're bypassing multi-factor authentication to then still be able to access our accounts. MFA fatigue. There is a method of multi-factor that has you verify if you're allowing a login to occur. Or is this you? Or are you trying to log into your account? And they'll send you prompts and you can say yes or no. MFA fatigue is when a threat actor sends these prompts to you over and over again. And then finally you just click yes because you're annoyed and you just want to move on. So that's one method where they could bypass multi-factor. The man-in-the-middle attack. This is interesting because what we see here is that the cyber criminals are standing up websites similar to what we went over before, where it's this login page that looks legitimate. And then they're having the target put their information in there. They're stealing that password. And then they're actually sending them to another web page, another fraudulent web page, asking for that multi-factor authentication code. And so once they have that, then they're putting it on those legitimate pages to access that account. It's a little confusing to try to explain, but you as the victim are putting it in a fraudulent web page. The cyber criminals putting it in a legitimate web page. And so they're accessing your account that way. And this leads me to how can we help prevent MFA bypass? And this makes my job more difficult because we go on, we tell people what they should be doing. And I've been talking about multi-factor. And now I have to say multi-factor is great. But if you're going to do it, do this other method, do one of these options if you can. The authentication apps, Microsoft, Google, they all have Google Authenticator and those types of applications. That method of multi-factor authentication or a hardware token, which is a physical token with a code on it, those methods are much better than a text message-based code or an email-based code. One of the reasons is because they are susceptible to these man-in-the-middle attacks. The codes that you get on your text messages or in your email oftentimes are valid for at least 15 minutes, and sometimes up to a few hours. And so what that does is that allows that threat actor, as you're putting your information in that fraudulent page, to then use that code to put it on the legitimate page. There's too much time is what I'm getting at here. There's too much time for them to play around with that code. The authentication apps and the hardware tokens are often only good for 30 seconds, maybe up to a minute depending, but I think it's usually around 30 seconds. So 30 seconds is too short of a time to try to use that code as that threat actor in most cases. So recommend those instead if you have that option available. There's also a means to steal tokens. This happened recently with the Citrix bleed instance that occurred. In these cases, they were able to target the Citrix or the NetScalers, and then they were able to hijack essentially a user's session, which means that they're using that user session that's already enabled to then be that user in that network. For that case, they're just stealing that session token, and session tokens can be valid for, I think, up to like 30 days. And so if you have the means, if there's a vulnerability available that you can steal that token, then you can act as that user. So reducing the amount of time that token is good for, that token is valid, will then help prevent that bypass method.
Krista, that's awesome. And I know full well that with everything going on out there, you could probably go for another hour just
Mhm.
sharing all the different things that we face. And maybe just comment on the
Mhm.
importance of having cybersecurity expertise, either in-house or outsourced. We deal with a lot of companies that, they're smaller companies, mid-sized companies, they feel like they have an IT department, they have somebody that can spell cybersecurity. Who would be interested in small companies like us? We hear a lot of that. Can you just comment on some of the threats against, specifically small and medium-sized companies?
Yeah, I always say this when we're looking at the news and we see different cyber incidents that occur. I just talked about Microsoft even. We get this bias in our mind that, oh, they're looking after those big fish. They're trying to get them. They're more high value targets. They're not going to bother with somebody with a company like ours. We're small. That really is not the case. They might not make the news, but they are very often targeted. And we can see this actually with ransomware. The majority of the ransomware victims are small to medium sized businesses, not enterprise corporations. Part of the reason for that is because of budgets. The small to medium sized businesses and organizations, they might not have the budget to devote to proper cybersecurity controls and a good program. And so there's ways that they can be exploited. And that might be something as simple as social engineering, or it might be that something was left unpatched because, they don't have a patch management or an asset management plan and program in place. So they are very often targeted. And because the threat actors know this, they know that likely, not likely, but in some cases, their cybersecurity implementation has not been very well deployed. And so there are ways for them to get in. And once they get in, often, so we have different platforms that we can offer access to if free. We're a government agency, so nothing we do is at a cost, but so there are ways that you can look at your environment and maybe you look great from the outside. Maybe you're like, we don't have anything public facing. I know we're really hard in that. But you have one employee that falls for a phishing email and they're able to get inside
Yep.
that network. Your network might be all gushy inside though. It might be
Hmm.
hard on the outside, but if it's fishy on the inside, then once they're in, they're in. So you really have to have a good cybersecurity program in place that accounts for all of those different factors. And there's a lot of information out there. Maybe it's a little bit of information overload, but where you can really find out the best methods of where you can start that won't be super costly, but will significantly help you harden your network.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the responses, and I know the speakers here have heard me say this many times in the past, but I just feel like it's worth repeating. When I'm talking with that small business and they say, what, we don't have anything that bad actors want, and, give me all the reasons why not, I say to them or ask them this question, how many times over the last 10, 12 years have you heard our politicians say, we're going to rebuild the economy on the backs of small businesses? And also in that same line, how many times have you heard there are countries out there that don't like us very much, would never take us on militarily, but they'll take us on in cyber warfare?
Yep.
And then the third point, 60% or more of small businesses that are breached, and I'm not talking about spam, they're out of business within 6 months. And
Yeah.
so it really does have a strong impact on our economy.
Mhm.
And when you look at the minor cost, the minimal cost of awareness training,
Mhm.
with the various platforms are out there. It doesn't matter if you're a company of 5 or 500 or 5,000. Everybody involved in an awareness program just helps the company over.
Right.
Your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked about social engineering several times here, and that comes down to having better user awareness. And like you said, low to no cost. Making sure that that's part of your program to have that training not only done. Honestly, you can't just do it once a year. You really have to make sure that people are aware of the changing threat environment because it changes so often. You can't just do something once a year, have them watch a video for 20 minutes and call it a day.
Yeah.
Having that continual awareness of what to look for, make it personalized to them too. We need them to care. So you can have a program, but you need them to understand why they need to care about this. It's for their own livelihood as well as the companies and have that buy-in. Oh, this can affect you at your work, but this is also something that can apply to your home life as well.
Mm.
And making sure that you as a person don't get victimized too.
Yeah, absolutely. They talk a lot about, top of mind, top of mind. I always think of
Mhm.
my Irish grandfather when they say top of mind.
Yeah.
but the truth is, and you nailed it. When it's that, once a year, twice a year, get everybody in a room, sit down for 2, 3 hours. It's a checkbox. I've seen it time and time again. It's just a checkbox. They're not really happy they're there. They have to do it. But when you have that regular reminder, I like to do our awareness training, a couple of times a month, 3 to 5 minute video. It's a small investment, but it's that constant reminder. So
Yes,
awesome.
absolutely.
Krista, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And, and the things that Krista shared, it's really for all of us, but in the federal world specifically, because of the threat, we're asked to do things from a compliance standpoint, from a governance standpoint. We're asked to do a lot of things, and there's a reason behind it. It's because the threat is real. And we have example after example of organizations being hit, and they may have a governance or a compliance program, but maybe it's not, top of mind or really important for the organization. But there are specific things that we as federal contractors have to adhere to. One being the NIST 800-171 requirement that we have in the federal space, and CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And so today we have Jacob Hill, who will be speaking on that for us. Jacob is a director over at also the founder of GRC Academy, and I've reviewed some of Jacob's material. It's outstanding. So he's got a great grasp on what's going on with 800-171, with NIST 2.0, the CSF 2.0, and CMMC 2.0. So he's going to share some of that with us. Jacob, greatly appreciate it and look forward to hear what you share.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike. And thank you all for attending. We really appreciate it. We'll just run through NIST CSF, explain what it is, and then also what changes are being made to NIST CSF 2.0. NIST Cybersecurity Framework, it really is focused on cybersecurity outcomes that help an organization reduce its cybersecurity risk. The framework is designed to be used by organizations of all sizes and sectors, and has been adopted throughout the United States and internationally as well. When it first came out, it was actually focused on critical infrastructure, but they quickly realized that this thing can be adopted by all kinds of different organizations. So it's great to see the adoption throughout really the world. NIST CSF does not prescribe how cyber outcomes should be achieved, but instead it maps to resources that provide additional guidance on practices and controls that can be used to achieve those outcomes. And I think that's really important because maybe not so much in the small, like the very, very small business world, but there are a lot of companies that have already made security investments and they already have implemented security frameworks. So NIST CSF is really complementary to those. And we'll see on the next slide, we have a timeline just showing, when all this was going down and starting. NIST CSF 1.1 is the current version on the street and was released back in 2018. And the CSF version 2.0 update effort began in early 2022 and actually is scheduled to be released later this month. So that's exciting. I'm hoping to have NIST on my podcast after the release. So we'll see. Hopefully I'll be able to get them on. NIST CSF is divided into 3 parts. And we'll just quickly run through this. It's kind of just foundational knowledge on the framework. First, we have the framework core, which houses the cybersecurity outcomes, which are grouped by functions, categories, and subcategories. And you'll see those functions and categories right here on the screen there. To give you an example, in this CSF 2.0, the public draft, there are 6 functions, and you'll see those right there, 22 categories, and then 106 subcategories. And the subcategories, obviously, they're within those categories there, and they're more specific requirements. The framework core also includes notional examples of how those outcomes might be achieved, and it also includes references to additional guidance on how to achieve those outcomes, and these are called informative references. So that could be anything from NIST 800-171, ISO 27001, 3, all kinds of different options there. The second part of NIST CSF is called profiles, and profiles capture the organization's current or target cybersecurity posture, just understanding where you are. And the third part of NIST CSF is called tiers, and it measures the maturity of the organization's cybersecurity program. Really, the most significant change in NIST CSF 2.0 is the addition of a new function dedicated to governance. And this change elevates governance from a category within the identify function to its own standalone function. So governance, when it comes down to it, even though it's the boring policy, process stuff, it actually is very important because you have to have that stuff in place because humans are involved and we're not automated. So the policies and process help us to make sure that we're doing everything correctly. There's also more of an emphasis on cybersecurity, supply chain risk management. They actually added a new category in the government function focused on cybersecurity, supply chain risk management. You'll see that within that government function right there. NIST also provided more detailed guidance and clarification, provided on roles, responsibilities, policies, and specific security practices, and making the framework really more actionable. And again, we should see NIST CSF 2.0 near the end of this month. I think there's some really good changes coming out. It's great to see implementation examples, helping small businesses really understand because, small businesses, there's a ton of them in the United States, but they may not all have really hardcore cybersecurity expertise. So examples are very, very helpful.
Jacob, before we go to the next slide, I wonder if you could comment a little bit more on, some of the changes that have been made to this. When we look at the number of controls in the, version one versus the number in version two, the actual number of controls hasn't gone up that much. And, when I look at it in the governing area, okay, we're adding this whole additional function with the various categories and subcategories. But it looks to me like in some of the other areas, they're not as heavy. And so it looks like some of the categories have been moved out of, identify or protect and whatnot and moved into the governance area. Could you comment on that as far as the, if I'm looking at this as a practitioner and I've been working with the organizations and whatnot, and I have that, version one focus, is this a scary jump going from version one to two, or, what are your thoughts that you could share with that?
Yeah, I don't think so. There's been some removals, but a lot of realignment within the framework. And as you said, I mean, from a subcategory standpoint, the change is just like a handful of changes there as far as quantity goes. So they really, from what I understand, they had the focus of do no harm, right? They really didn't want to make this, even though it's going from 1.1 to 2.0, they really didn't want to make it a difficult transition. So it seems that it should be relatively easier to adopt this. We'll talk about NIST 800-171 in a moment. That will be much more difficult, but CSF 2.0, hopefully it won't be as difficult.
Mhm. And I know you're going to talk about 800-171, but could you spend just another minute talking about the combination of the NIST CSF and the informative reference, how that truly works together to give an organization, kind of a framework that they're dealing with?
Yeah. So NIST CSF, it doesn't necessarily get into the weeds of how you achieve a particular outcome. It says, here's what you need to do. And then you bring in those informative references to actually get into those weeds of how to achieve those outcomes that the NIST CSF actually requires. So an example, NIST 853 is the huge security catalog. It has, I think, well over 1,000 security controls, so very, very granular there. Obviously you have, baselines that come from that, but that is one way to, and like I said earlier, a lot of companies have already invested. Let's say it's ISO 27001, NIST CSF can leverage that, and they have mappings to those informative references, and they map the subcategory to those controls. So I mean, it's really, really a nice complementary relationship.
Awesome. And so is it fair to say the informative reference becomes either a capability requirement? So that informative reference is focused more on, say, with 853 storage or 171 CUI,
Yes.
or it could be more industry based, like, the utilities company or, NERC or something like that would be more industry based.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I think that's why NIST CSF can be adopted by so many different types of organizations because each, different sectors, they have their different standards or frameworks, and
Mhm.
NIST CSF can ride right along with those. Let me give you just a bit of a backstory on 80171. I think it's really important to understand the context. 80171 is a special publication that documents the security controls required to protect controlled unclassified information on non-federal systems. In other words, CUI, or controlled unclassified information, that's stored on government contractor systems. And I should have give you the warning ahead, expect a lot of, big words and acronyms. I actually had the opportunity to speak with the lead author of NIST 80171, Dr. Ron Ross, on my podcast last year about a number of topics, including this revision. And I really enjoyed that conversation. It was an honor. It's really important to understand the purpose of 80171 and what it does for you and what it doesn't. The focus is on the confidentiality of CUI. Think about, you have HIPAA out there, and the data in scope is health data, PCI DSS. You have payment processing information that you're worried about there. But in 80171's case, we're worried about CUI, and CUI becomes the regulated data. If CUI touches a system, then 80171 must be applied to the system to protect the confidentiality of the CUI. And that's critical. They're not worried if, your system blows up, you lose the data. This is so no availability requirements. They're just worried about the confidentiality of the CUI, making sure that the bad guys don't get a hold of it. 80171, it's not meant to be a comprehensive security program for a company. It's just focused in on the confidentiality of the CUI. 80171 is required by federal agencies today, although the DoD is the only agency that has contractual requirements to implement it. Interestingly, and I think we'll talk about this in a moment, there's a FAR contractual clause that has been in the works since 2017. And perhaps one day soon, we'll see that NIST 80171 clause added into the FAR. So, quick history lesson. 2010, the Obama administration issued Executive Order 13556 titled Controlled and Classified Information. The executive order tasked the National Archives and Records Administration to create a CUI registry documenting the CUI data types in use across the entire federal government. I can imagine that was quite a task. And from what I understand, it took them a few years to get through that, and also to develop safeguards for that CUI. NARA delegated the safeguard development to NIST, and in 2015, NIST released the first version of NIST 80171. Today, NIST is scheduled to release the third version of NIST 80171 in April or May of this year. So it's kind of interesting. CSF later this month, 80171, revision 3, April or May. So interesting how that aligns. And here's a few interesting changes. The number of security controls decreased from 110 to 95. NIST 80171 revision 2 has 110. R3, as far as this final draft, has 95. However, this lower number is not really an accurate representation. There are actually more requirements buried in the text of the security controls. So even though there are less security controls, there are actually more requirements you'll have to account for. So that's interesting. 80171 revision 3 also includes 44 organizational defined parameters, and these are variables within a security controls text that can be defined by a government agency or a defense contractor. So that could be, for example, lock the system within variable minutes, So an agency could say 15 minutes is what we want. Another agency could say, well, we want 5 minutes, So that's the purpose of that. But the government strategy really to populate these ODPs is not known. And a concern is that you could have multiple agencies with multiple definitions for these ODPs driving different requirements for maybe even different branches of the military or even across the federal wide, at different agencies. So the original draft had 100 ODPs. Now we have 44. So that's good, but that's an interesting piece. And in the next slide, we'll talk about just real quick, a very interesting security control that NIST added into revision 3. That is 3.14.8, information management and data retention. And I think a lot of companies keep information indefinitely, and this control will require them to eventually remove the CUI from their systems. So enter DoD's CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. CMMC is focused on providing the DoD with increased assurance that its defense contractors are properly securing DoD's controlled and classified information. And the whole reason why CMMC came to be was defense contractors were being hacked by foreign nation states, and the DoD CUI on those contractor networks was being stolen. DoD issued a DFARS clause requiring that contractors implement NIST 800-171 no later than December 31st of 2017. But when the DoD assessed these contractors themselves over the years, in many cases, the contractors just did not fare well at all. And unfortunately, the adoption of 800-171 across the defense industrial base has been sadly not good at all. So the DoD quickly realized that self-attestation of compliance just didn't work. In the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA of 2020, Congress directed the DoD to create a third-party independent assessment program to assess the cybersecurity of defense contractors. So the DoD was, they were actually working on CMMC, but then Congress put it into law that they had to do this. CMMC 1.0 was released in early 2020. Then later, after the Biden administration came in, CMMC went under review. And during this period, it was strange. Many folks thought that CMMC was going to go away, but CMMC 2.0 was released in 2021. And then we'll talk about, actually, just real quickly, what is in CMMC. So it has 3 levels, and the level that's required will depend on the type of information the contract involves and the criticality of that contract. Level 1 is required for contracts that only handle federal contract information. Level 1 has 15 security requirements or security controls based on FAR 52.204-21's basic safeguarding requirements. Level 2 is required for contracts that handle controlled and classified information and has 110 requirements from NIST 800-171 Revision 2. Note that CMMC will not immediately adopt 800-171 Revision 3 that we just talked about, and that could be at least a year or two before that happens, because it would actually require additional rulemaking to make that change. Level 2 requires a third-party assessment of the security requirements for most Level 2 contracts, and a small subset of CMMC Level 2 contracts will allow the contractor to self-assess, but the vast majority will require a third-party assessment. Level 3 is required for DoD's most critical contracts that involve CUI, and it has 24 enhanced security requirements from NIST 800-172, which we haven't talked about. That's to address the advanced persistent threat of nation states. And that's only going to be required for DoD's most critical, probably weapon systems, those types of contracts. In December of last year, the CMMC 2.0 program proposed rule was finally released. Once that rule goes into effect, CMMC 2.0 will be codified in Title 32 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Nearly every DoD contract will have CMMC requirements that specify a CMMC level the contractor must have to be awarded a contract. After the CMMC rulemaking processes are complete and the final rules are issued, DoD will begin to add CMMC requirements to contract solicitations, and CMMC compliance or certification will become a requirement to win almost any DoD contract. CMMC will be phased in, but we anticipate that the large primes will also be a big driver for smaller companies to obtain certification even before most contracts require it. DoD already has a number of cybersecurity contractual clauses in place, and that's a whole nother conversation that Jill will get into in a moment.
Awesome. Jacob, thanks so much. Hey, before we switch over to Jill, I'm interested in your thoughts on a couple of things. One is you said it, CMMC to finally there. And we've watched over the last number of years, the CMMC requirement pushed out. And a number of federal contractors that I deal with on a regular basis, they're thinking it's a train wreck, and is it real? So just kind of put a pin in that one for a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other
Sure.
thing is then I ask them about or others, ask about, CMMC, how's your CMMC journey going? And they're like, CMM what? So what, and I think that there's a tie-in, and I am interested in your thoughts on this. There's a tie-in that says CMMC, the requirement for CMMC is moved out. So why should I bother with my 800-171? The requirement on the 171, November 2020, that has never gone away. But there's this impression like I don't have to do that. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, that's right. CMMC really was required to put teeth into this. DoD, they saw self-attestation of compliance. I mean, back then, December 31st of 2017, it was required, and it just wasn't happening. And so CMMC had to come in to give them teeth and actually have an independent assessor come in and validate that you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I think that CMMC is really going to drive the compliance. It's almost like, that person, the drill instructor or drill sergeant, over the recruits, and they're like, get this done, come on. So it seems that I really, CMMC is not going to go away. They've been working on it for years. The proposed rule is here. And as early as next year, we're going to start seeing requirements come in.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Very, very informative. And as we look toward not only the requirements that we have from a cybersecurity compliance requirement, but there's a number of FARs and DFARs that are tied to proposals coming out. And I almost hesitate, saying this on the air like this, but most small contractors, ourselves included, we go right to the RFP, we go right to the statement of work. What are the requirements? And we're responding. And then there's this section at the end of the RFP, 30, 40, 60, 80 FAR requirements. And of course they checkbox the ones that you need to be aware of. And most of us, not being legal contracts people, we kind of scan through it or say that it's going to take me longer to read through that than to actually respond to the RFP. And we neglect them, unfortunately. So Jill Lawson is here with us today. She's an expert in this area. She's going to help us through how we should look at that, what our perspective should be, and the importance of adhering to what the FAR or the DFAR requirement is. Jill has a ton of experience, as you can see on the slide here. She's been dealing with multiple levels of certification and program management, and is a provisional assessor in the CMMC area. So Jill, thank you so much for spending your time with us, but also sharing your knowledge. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. And this is just a great opportunity to discuss a subject I have a lot of passion about, and that is protecting controlled and classified information. The DoD has had a lot of problems with CUI being exfiltrated, and the contract clauses that are used to try to control that I have on display here. And also I included the FAR clause, which is for federal contract information, which if you have any contracts with the federal government, the FAR clause is in every single contract. And the federal contract information is the information that is negotiated after notification of award and signature of the contract, just to let you know what that is. But today I'd like to discuss the DFARs. The big clause is DFARS 252.204-7012. That clause, if it's in your current contracts, please review and read that entire clause. We don't have time to go through it right now, but it literally takes up to 12 NIST publications to implement that clause correctly. So it's very, very complicated. As Jacob referred to before, it was supposed to be effective on contracts December 1st, 2017, meaning that any contract that was signed after that date, the defense contractor is attesting that, hey, they implemented this. And as we know, as what the previous conversation has discussed, not so much. And that is why CMMC was created. In between CMMC actually becoming law, the DoD created two other clauses, 252.204-7019, which is a notification, and then for the RFPs, And then they created 252.24-7020, which actually is in the contract. These clauses require that defense contractors create a system security plan based off of NIST 80171, which is required by the 7012 clause, and evaluate it using a DoD methodology and come up with a final score and post that score to the Supplier Performance Risk System, SPRS. The SPRS score is required now. And they in 2020 is when they released it. And so it's been on new RFPs and also for option year renewals. Several contracting officers are inputting those two clauses in the option year contracts. So that is like the interim solution. The DoD is telling the defense industrial base, the DIB, look, we are really serious about this, and we need to have some type of signal from you that you are actually implementing the 7012 clause. The 7021 clause, which is going to be the CMC clause, it's yet to be go through the final rules. But as I said, in the interim, the SPRS score is mandatory now. There are 5 foundational truths about implementing the NIST 80171 and being in compliance with the 7012 clause, 7019, and 7020 clauses. And these are managerial truths. As a program manager, when I receive proposals and chairing system source selection evaluation boards, we could always tell if higher management really was organized and put together a comprehensive plan, or if a bunch of techie people or a bunch of engineers, saying me, that were not congruent and did not actually coordinate with each other. In the proposals, it was very clear to us, just to let you know, that PMs and source selection evaluation boards really do have a good sense of how well the management of a company is going. The very first truth is the CMC is an attestation or third-party certification of the implication in NIST 80171, which we talked about. We beat the horse with that one. The other second truth that's not so well known is that DoD created CMC and created the attestations so the owners and the leaders, the CFOs, the CEOs, the C-suite take ownership and responsibility for protecting controlled and classified information. It's very important for the DoD that they have a senior person in each defense industrial-based company that has ownership and responsibility of safeguarding CUI. The third truth is as Mike has referred to several times, it's not just about getting to the very first score, to the very first SSP, to the very first CMC certification. It is sustaining a continual level of assessment readiness. And that is what the CMC is all about. CMC is a triennial certification. In between that triennial, on the first and second anniversaries, that's when senior leadership has to attest to a self-assessment using that DoD methodology that you are still maintaining that same level of safeguarding, regardless of new contracts, personnel turnover, and other organizational changes that could impact your CUI safeguarding. The DoD really doesn't care. They need to have that senior level attestation that you, owner, CFO, personal responsible, has kept and sustained that same level of safeguarding as as was the previous year. The fourth truth is the cost of attestation and certification is now a permanent budget and indirect cost proposal factor. That means not only, as you should have been, factoring costs, the indirect cost for the implementation of the NIST 80171, now you need to factor in the cost of CMC assessing. The CMC assessment requirements are much different than the NIST implementation requirements. The CMC assessing requirements require annual training, role-based training. They require an annual system and a security risk assessment, that could also change your landscape and make you change your system. That is a cost all into itself. So it's a continual cost overrun. And it's something that has to be padded and reflected in your company budget. But most of all, when you develop your proposal, be sure to work with your contracts manager and include a sound formula to try and recoup some of those costs. The fifth foundational truth is, depending on how you do all of the aforementioned activities, it's depending how competitive you're going to be. Your proposals could either be competitive and based upon not having too much profit, based upon just trying to get the contract, and engaging the outside external competitors and deciding, well, this is going to be their price point, so I'll make that my price point. And it's completely external focused, not focused on what your company needs to grow. The second level is pricing to win with a minimal profit. And that is, even though I want to be competitive with the other competitors, I still need to have a little bit of profit to keep going. So it's inward focused, but it's still external driven. The place that you want to be at is you want to create the competitive edge pricing with a maximum level of profit, and look at yourself internally, knowing that you have kept your costs down because you have made the right decisions and the right strategies on how to implement NIST 80171 on a continual basis and prepare for the CMMC assessments. That's the sweet spot. And that's very difficult to get to. And it takes a lot of talent and it takes a lot of planning to get to that point. And that's the point that I really wanted to make. And I'm so thankful to be here to do that, because in CMMC webinars, most people are talking about the actual technical implementation costs. It is the managerial strategic planning that is really going to make the difference, whether you're level 3 or CMMC. This is in the time-space continuum in the defense industrial base. CMMC could literally be a great gift to those companies that actually attempt to get proposals that are competitive. So here's components of a competitive edge strategy. Team members count. Internal team members that are credentialed, that have experience with NIST, have experience and know NIST, as I said again, to implement NIST 80171 takes a minimum of knowing 12 NIST publications. So it's very complicated. Also, your team members should be HR to know how much salaries will cost, and also your contract manager to assist with the pricing. It takes a lot of different talent, a lot of different skill sets to come together under the leadership of a senior person in the company, the decision maker, the resource, the person that gives permission for resources. The next element is you have to know the right CMC ecosystem questions to ask. For instance, you may need a document management system. Keeping policies up to date it can actually take up so much more of your time. And you know that your people don't want to spend a lot of time on policies. Know your external service providers, your managed service providers, your managed system security providers. Know like a virtual desk interface. There are all different types of products out there that will help you achieve your strategic plan. Also, there's a lot of free stuff out there. The government has the CISA, DCSC has released a lot of free tools and training to assist you. Know what's out there, baseline, what you can get for free. And also put together the right team that readies your organization for a CMC assessment. The team should have, again, extensive knowledge of NIST, but also extensive knowledge of what it takes to pass a CMC assessment. So here are the two internal and external considerations that management needs to focus on in order to be competitive. Baseline your company capabilities, understand your current skill sets, understand your contracts. Well, first of all, the first step is understand your contracts. Understand the CY workflow, understand the skill sets that your company has already and understand your IT systems. Once you understand those, then you know what type of external resources you need to secure to pass the CMMC assessment. So that's my presentation of how the importance of management and strategic planning is to secure a competitive edge in today's environment.
Jill, that was wonderful and informative. Thank you so much. And if you could, Jill, you provided a lot of information, and I got to believe that a number of our participants are saying, "How the heck am I going to afford this?" There's a lot of costs involved and whatnot. And I know in my own experience, a number of smaller contractors in the federal space have decided to leave. So they've basically taken their ball and gone home. Because they say, I just can't afford to do this. It's too many people. It's too much time. As a small business, I'm focused on, cash flow and trying to get my employees paid and getting people to work. And I don't have time for this. What would you say to, or what were your thoughts on how you would address that? Or, just your own impression from having conversations with some of the smaller companies that have just said, I can't do it, and are leaving the DIB, and what is the impact on the DIB in that happening?
Well, first, let me take the latter part. As acquisition program manager for 20 years, small businesses are essential to our nation's defense. And in 2019, when I was on a focal point working group and CMC 1.0 was being fielded, as acquisition professional, I was stunned that this third party certification was going to be overlaid on our small and medium businesses. However, on the flip side is the compromise of control of classified information, the disruption to our national defense is severe. What happens to a program, a DoD program, and CUI has been compromised to the point that the 3-level agencies notify the acquisition program manager, hey, your supply chain is severely compromised. You have to reconfigure your weapon system. That is incredibly disruptive. So there's two points to this. One is, it's hard to be a DoD contractor. It's difficult. At the same time, DoD needs to have contractors protect the CUI. For the small businesses, first of all, being informed, understanding your contract, understanding your contractual obligations, understanding your CUI and the workflow, understanding what skill sets that you currently have, baselining your capabilities, and then understanding what external resources are available to you to consider. You can put together and map together a great program that is cost effective. That when you put in your proposals, when you get the government's going to reimburse you for portions after with every single contract that has CUI in it. Because it's an indirect cost, the government does not reimburse full amount, but there are formulas. So if you have several contracts with CUI, you will be able to recoup your investment. But again, in order to even compete for those contracts, you need to have a SPUR score. So you have to you have to do long range planning and strategize. How are you going to do this? But it is very much doable.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you so much. So again, getting back to, we wanted to tell a story today. What's the threat out there? What's the expectation that the federal government has of their federal contractors, and some of the real meaty things that we have to take care of from federal acquisition and those kind of requirements. But to the next speaker, I know he and I are on the same page. The end state is not passing the audit and being in compliance. That's the beginning of the journey. Rick, I've known you for a long time. And, back in the ITIL days, your entire business was all about making things easier, improving efficiency, improving effectiveness, continual service improvement mindset. And everything that we just heard, tells me that this is a huge lift. And I know that you are known for looking at a problem and saying there's got to be a better way. And so, Rick, I'm hoping that you can share with us what's a better way? Well, how do we go about this and take some of the burden off, at least make it a lighter load?
Absolutely, Mike. This is one area, as you know, we've known each other for a long time. If you make something so complex that people just kind of shut down, they stop listening to it because they just get so overwhelmed because they can't get their head around the complexity of the problem that's trying to be solved. So they just don't do anything. And in turn, they become compromised. But just to kind of follow up on the previous speakers, where Krista talked about, why small and medium-sized businesses should care about cybersecurity. It's because the threat is real, it's growing, and the outcomes are becoming more severe. I mean, I think you mentioned it, Mike, yourself, that, if an organization suffers a ransomware attack or some other type of attack that takes their business operations down, they're out of business in 6 months. Not only can they afford not to be out of business, but the DoD can't afford to have them out of business because they provide critical components to the DoD supply chain and to the security and protection of this country. So I think Krista's point was absolutely spot on. I think Jacob went into the frameworks and control systems that are available through organizations like NIST and ISO that allow people to put in place some capabilities to protect not only the CUI but the resiliency and ongoing operations of their business. I really love Jill's presentation and talk about, I call it the rules and the cost. All right. Because, at the end of the day, you have to understand the rules, and the rules are changing. They're changing in every sector, not only the DoD, they're changing, from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're changing international with the rules coming out of Europe, like DORA and so on. So, so I think the one theme here that we're seeing is change is now the new norm. Change is going to happen all the time. Change is going to happen on the rules front. It's going to happen on the attack front, and it's going to happen on the reaction front. In other words, organizations can no longer just sit back and wait for something to happen. They have to be proactive. They have to put in place systems that are capable of protecting, their business and the operations of that business. What I'm going to talk about today is a cost-effective way to converge these frameworks and standards and informative references and business systems that we've been hearing about throughout this webinar, and really with a focus in on helping an organization deliver secure, resilient, and I guess most importantly, audible digital, secure digital outcomes. Because, we're no longer in the mode that you can say that you do something and you check it off on a compliance list. The auditors are going to come in and verify whether you actually have the capability and whether the capability delivers the outcome, that they're expecting. So you really have to, provide a way for them to audit your systems to prove that you've done everything they've asked you to do. Okay. Legally, it also protects a lot of organizations because with some of the new rules coming out of the SEC for publicly held companies, some of the new rules coming out of Europe in terms of DORA, people are being held personally accountable. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of incentive for organizations to basically take this seriously. So a little bit about the DVMS Institute. I kind of view us as a think tank, and our mission is to provide, organizations of any size, scale, and complexity an affordable, pragmatic, approach to facilitating those secure, resilient, and audible outcomes I mentioned earlier. We spent the last 8 or 9 years researching, the various solutions that are out there and what could we do as a think tank to help, make that simpler, as Mike mentioned earlier. Our job is to make things simple. It's kind of the easy button, and in the world of digital, it's really hard to come up with an easy button because things are so complex and the landscape is just growing so fast that it's really hard to keep ahead of it. But we spent the last 9 years researching this. Our vision was, once we figured out the problem, was to create these publications, this body of knowledge that would help, organizations and individuals come up to speed quickly on this new approach. All right. We tied that together with certification training. And the key here is accredited certification training. So people, third-party organizations have validated that the outcomes that the training is designed to deliver actually are delivered, kind of similar to what I just talked about in organizational cybersecurity capabilities. And then last but not least is really about, building a set of platforms, if you will, that would help organizations assess the things they need to assess initially, because you can't start anywhere else than where you are right now. So you need to understand where you are. You need to be able to go in and assess not only your control and the systems that support the controls, you need to assess your culture, right? Because at cybersecurity, or the responsibility for cybersecurity, does not fall in one person's lap, as a lot of people have been talking about in terms of a CISO. It falls in everyone's lap, and everyone needs to understand three things. They need to understand what is digital. And I know that sounds silly when I say it, but a lot of people don't truly understand what digital is. They don't plug into the wall or plug into some wireless system and everything's magic behind the scenes, right? They need to understand how digital works, not at the technical level, but at the business level, okay? They need to understand the risk associated with digital. I mean, the threat landscape is just massive right now, and it will grow 100 times bigger than it is right now with the advent of AI, with the advent of quantum computing. So this problem isn't going away. It's just going to get worse. And that's why it's important for us to get on top of it as quickly as we possibly can. So it's important for organizations to do these assessments, to know where they're at in terms of culture and controls. And I guess last but not least, capabilities, right? So they need to do a skills assessment. Who do we have on staff today that can fill some of these key roles in helping us build this program? And not only build it, but continually innovate it. Because the bad guys are innovating every single day. They are figuring out ways to crack systems that no one ever thought could be cracked. So we need to figure out ways to prevent them from cracking those systems. And we need to understand what skills we have on board to do that and what skills we need to contract for to support that. Okay. So once again, the vision is to create training that will help organizations get the knowledge they need to begin the process of doing all the things I just mentioned. So as has been said many times, CMMC compliance is about protecting CUI, all right? And that's super important to the DoD for all the reasons Jill and Krista, and Jacob mentioned already, all right? So that's a given. I mean, that's not going away. That's here to stay, and we got to figure out a way to do it, okay? Deal with it. What I'm here to talk about is this new concept, which we call digital value management. And people say, well, what does that have to do with cybersecurity? All right. Because it says digital value. Because at the end of the day, all these organizations are in business to deliver digital value, or to deliver value through a digital ecosystem that enables some outcome to happen, whether that's, parts for a helicopter or, something else that the DoD can utilize. It's about a business, right? And the value that business delivers. So when we research this problem, we dove deep into, well, what are the outcomes that need to happen? And how are those outcomes attached to the business or the value that the business delivers? So we decided to call this new thing a digital value management system. In fact, what the DVMS is an overlay. So basically, the beauty of an overlay is it sits on top of your existing systems, all right? All of that complexity you got going on to run your business from a digital point of view, this layers right on top of it. And it provides organizations the capability to converge frameworks, standards, methods, informative references, all these things you heard talked about in the beginning of this webinar, together to deliver a specific set of secure, resilient, and auditable outcomes. All right. I kind of tell people that the DVMS is very, very similar to the cloud computing world, where cloud was created to give organizations the ability to dynamically allocate compute, storage, and network on demand based upon the needs of their business and the changes in the marketplace. Well, that's what the DVMS does. The DVMS allows an organization to dynamically manage their cybersecurity risk, their resiliency, and client data privacy, all right, which are the top three things that organizations are on the hook to manage, right? So CUI is one thing. There's beyond that. They need to look at, how do we remain resilient as an organization if an attack is successful, and we need to recover our business to continue to deliver the products that we're on the hook to deliver. So it really takes organizations to the next level, but it makes it cost effective and simple to do utilizing this DVMS program. I'm going to go through this quickly. And for those of you on the call today, all of these links here are all up on our website, and you can watch these little explainer videos that we put together that will take you on a deeper dive into each of these areas. But I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about, when we researched this and how we built the digital value management system, what components that we think were important to underpin this system. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, the DVMS was designed, its purpose right from the beginning was designed to allow any size organization. I don't care if you're a 2-person SMB or you're a 50,000 person, Fortune 500 company. All right. This was designed to support any type of customer. And that's the beauty of an overlay model. An overlay model enables that to happen. Okay. And as I mentioned before, it provides that cost-effective way to converge these frameworks. Convergence is key here. And, when we were putting this together, we spent a lot of time talking to some really smart people, both in academia, as well as the DoD, as well as, the commercial side of the businesses to confirm our thoughts and our ideas. And so this has been vetted by a lot of folks and basically validated and is being adopted across the globe in a big way. So we know it works. Okay. And so what we're trying to do is make more people aware of it so that they can utilize this overlay model to solve not only their CMMC problem, but their resiliency problem and so on. The third thing that we talk about is what we call create, protect, and deliver, or our CPD model. All right. And the CPD model, as it states here, represents this, simple, connected, layered solution that facilitates these outcomes that I've been mentioning. Right. If you think about it, most organizations in the amount of time digital's been, available, have been creating and delivering. The goal was to create as fast as you can and deliver as fast as you can so that the customer can realize the value and we as an organization can realize the revenue, right? The thing that they were missing was protecting that value, right? And the reason they were missing it is because it wasn't part of the organization's core strategy, right? In other words, there wasn't governance policies and programs set up to ensure that every digital service was protected as it should be based on its importance to the business. All right. That was the piece that was missing. And as Jacob mentioned earlier, within this cybersecurity framework, I'm a big fan of the NIST framework. We've actually integrated it into our DVMS architecture. But one of the things that we were really petitioning NIST hard for was the addition of the governance function, because you can't do anything else unless you have the rules. You got to know what rules you're adhering to ensure that you're delivering the outcomes that meet the requirements of the rules. All right. So the CPD model really, provides the overlay model, if you will, of the system that interconnects all these different systems or converges all these frameworks to deliver these outcomes. And that's what the CPD model is. The ZX model is what operationalizes the CPD model. And it's a really simple approach, because what it does is it provides an organization the ability to govern, to assure, plan, design, change, execute, and innovate those secure, resilient, and auditable outcomes. These are standard business functions that most organizations already have in place today to manage their business. So it won't be that difficult for them to either, change them or update them to reflect managing cybersecurity as a business capability. That the goal here was to allow them to utilize pretty much what they already have. And I think we've been successful at doing that. Following that is the 3D knowledge model, which is my absolute favorite. All right. Because one of the key components, especially in organizations that are silo based, everyone has their own little domain doing their own little thing. And somehow or another, magically, they all come together to deliver some sort of digital service. Okay. The issue is that a lot of times organizations or individuals don't really understand dependencies. In other words, who's dependent upon me to deliver an outcome that enables them to deliver their outcome, and who am I dependent upon to do the same thing? So as part of these assessments I mentioned earlier, it's really important to understand organizational dependencies. Now, it's really easy to do that in small companies. It's really hard to do that in large companies. Right. But I think, if you utilize some of these assessment capabilities we talked about and some that are provided, through the DoD and others, it will at least give you an opportunity to, to kind of figure things out or get as close to figuring things out as you possibly can so that you can then put in place the capabilities through this 3D knowledge model to allow communications to happen and to allow collaboration to happen, between these different silos. So, and by the way, when I say silos, I'm not just talking about internal, stovepipes of people. I'm talking about third-party suppliers like cloud companies, like MSPs, other people or organizations that provide you capabilities that you can't provide yourself, but they ultimately are part of your team. And you need to be able to communicate and collaborate with them to ensure that everyone understands the dependencies and that everyone is always continually innovating and is prepared to deal with change, because change is the new norm. And last but not least is the fast track model. What we tell folks is, and I mentioned it already a couple times, you can't start anywhere other than where you are. So you really need to do that assessment. And once you do that assessment, then you can basically, what we like to say, you can stabilize the patient. Okay. The patient is bleeding. There's a lot of risks that need to be mitigated. But what you want to do is get the patient stabilized by mitigating, the most important risks right up front, like setting up an incident response program. You're putting in place some of the baseline controls that are just fundamental to digital business. And then really working towards, adding additional controls that will allow you to realize the future state that you need to be at, either to support the CMMC requirement or some other regulatory requirement that you as a business are responsible for. So what Fast Track does is it gives you a very simple approach to get the ball rolling, and it tells you exactly where to start.
Thanks, Rick. Well, that was great. There's a heavy load that organizations have to do this. I wonder if you could comment on this. I talk to businesses all the time, and maybe they're going through an 800-171 initiative, taking on 53 or ISO 27001, whatever the requirement might be. It tends to be the technical team, the technical leadership that the initial introduction is made. If you could just talk a little bit about two things. One is, how is this model different, taking it from the technical discussion to the business discussion?
Mm-hmm.
And also, you mentioned a lot about operationalizing the controls. And there is a lot of training out there on the NIST cybersecurity framework, the controls. They tend to focus on, what is the control and why it's important. How is it different? What do you actually mean when you say, the CPD model, operationalizes the controls, and what does that really mean? Share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, you're right, Mike. The conversations we have are non-technical, all right? Because our whole, in all of our research, our focus was, about allowing the organization to protect its digital value, the digital outcomes, okay? And obviously, since we started the research 9 years ago, the rules have changed. So we had to ensure that our system could adapt, help organizations adapt to the rule changes in a very rapid and reliable way, okay? So to your point, Mike, we don't talk about any technology at all when we have conversations with customers. And we tend to start at the senior executive level because it's important for them to get behind this right away. If you don't get the senior leadership team behind it, you can put all the control systems you want in place. You will fail. You will absolutely fail. All right. Because what the senior executives need to do is establish the policies and the rules for the organization. Right. And that includes the culture that underpins that organization. So there's a lot of pieces that need to come together from a business point of view. And if you think about it, I mean, every business is digital now. So let's just assume that be the case. And so, you have to have a strategy for your digital business. You have to completely understand what outcomes the digital business needs to enable. And you need to completely understand and comply with the rules that are associated with that digital business that are set by industry regulators or the government or other institutions. It's really, really simple. But when people think about cybersecurity, a lot of people, especially who don't have any experience in that space, their eyes gloss over. They just go, well, that's not me.
Mhm.
I don't know anything about that. But
Yeah.
in reality, they do, because it's about risk. Everything. They need to have this paradigm shift in their thinking where they look at business strategy and digital risk through the same business lens. So every strategic decision you make for the business, you have to ensure that you've assessed it from a risk point of view And if it's something that's core and mission critical to the business, ensure that all the right capabilities are in place to protect that service, and manage that risk associated with that service, right? And so I think, what we try to do is change the narrative, because there's so much discussion about controls and other really complex things that most people don't understand. And we try to move people into a mindset of, this is just another business function that you're enabling. And so, you need to be thinking about it from a business point of view. And once you've figured that out, then you can put in place all the other capabilities that you need to deliver that capability within the business. And yes, it will involve some existing business systems. It will involve the adoption of some new capabilities that you don't have right now, like CPD as an example, or the 3D knowledge model, right? But it really simplifies the what an organization needs to do. And I think that's kind of where I think, we need to help these organizations get to, because otherwise they'll just sit there and be confused, and in some cases not do anything, even if the rules have changed, forcing them to do it. And by the time they realize they should have been doing it, they now are suffering other types of pain, whether that be successful attacks or the DoD saying, we can't award you contracts because you don't have the capabilities that you need to have. So it's about changing the narrative and about changing the discussion. Hopefully that answers your question, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds to me, Rick, that it forces organizations to look at what is their digital business value that they're putting out there, and what are the assets that are associated with that. And it almost forces them to, just kind of guide me, make sure I'm right here, but it forces them to really look at their assets and understand the value of that asset and put the right level of protection around it. And if I look at, what we've talked about earlier, that yeah, I can fulfill the functionality capability requirement of the control. But if I've wrapped that whole continual improvement methodology on top of it, if I'm always doing better than I did, if I'm doing better today than I did yesterday, then would it be fair to say that self-assessing and the audit every 3 years is going to be significantly easier and a lot less angst involved in it? Why don't you comment on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's absolutely true. I mean, people have always been afraid of audits. The auditors that come in, oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And I think, where organizations need to take themselves is by having a system in place that delivers secure, resilient, and auditable outcomes. You're not afraid of the auditors anymore. In fact, what you want to do as part of your design process is to engage the auditor, because an auditor looks at the world, in terms of purpose. Is it fit for purpose? In other words, does it meet the requirements that regulators want us to meet? And then an implementer looks at it for use. How can this be utilized within an organization and to deliver outcomes, right? If you bring those two worlds together and you have in place the system that provides answers to both of those questions, then everyone's happy. And more importantly, the business is happy because it's delivering what it needs to protect its value, to protect its business, and to meet its regulatory requirements. So I think, that's the other paradigm shift in thinking, is that implementers and auditors are not enemies. They actually need to be friends. They need to be working together to ensure that when we do this on the first try, we get it right. And I think, once again, it's all part of this risk management team where you bring together all these different people from the business, including legal, and financial folks, the auditing folks, the risk teams, the project and program managers. Everyone's part of this solution, but the focus is business and not technology.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rick. All right. I hope everyone's gained a ton of information here, and let's kind of shift from the presentation mode into more of the panelist mode. And we do have a great lineup, all of the speakers that you've already heard from today. But we also have with us Patrick von Schlag. He is the president of Deep Creek Center. Again, another long-term partnership relationship that I've had with Patrick, and he's one of the experts out there in all sorts of disciplines: IT service management, cybersecurity, agile, program and project management. Very, very strong player here and a real voice in the industry. So Patrick, thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion.
Wonderful to be here with everybody.
Awesome. And I just want to make sure that I'm not still sharing. So thank you, everyone. So if I can have all of our panelists up, and let's just start with this. We heard a lot of good information today. I think we covered it from beginning right to end, and hopefully the participants got an idea that it's a challenge, but it can be done, and it can be done. And you have a number of industry experts here that can help you. But let's kind of kick it off. And Patrick, I'm going to start with you. You're an expert in the field, and you've been doing this for a long time. But especially there's a very interesting twist when it comes to IT working with cyber, working with the business, and everybody's pointing fingers at each other. And it seems like some of the things we've talked about, you can't be successful unless all of these groups are working together. And it's not just IT and just cyber and just the business leadership. It's also all of the team members and the supply chain and all that stuff. So we covered a lot of ground here, but so it's somebody asking the question, where do I get started? How do I initiate something like this? And most importantly, how do I get to my leadership to get that, executive buy-in? Because that's always the challenge, right? Getting the executive buy-in to see the vision and then to, work together as an organization to pull it off. What would you share with the group?
So really good question. A couple thoughts just to kind of begin this, and then obviously I encourage you to bring the rest of the panel in too. You can't do security in a security silo, right? And the goal really isn't, to Rick's point from the previous discussion, isn't security by itself anyway. It's about value creation and value protection, right? How does the organization deliver on its digital goals? How does it provide sufficient protections? And then, of course, being able to adapt. So the first order of business is that in order to actually successfully integrate security, you need, first of all, to engage your business in this broad understanding of risk-informed strategic decisions, right? That you want to think of strategy and risk holistically, right? How do we best optimize our strategy risk posture? And it is an optimized question, right? Because ultimately, we're not going to be able to do all the things we might do because we don't have enough money, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough time. Right? Again, because you can't do security in a silo, right? You really have to begin by looking at the rest of the organization's capabilities first. Right? How, for example, does our organization manage provisioning? Right? How do I make access controls effectively work if I don't have a sufficiently robust provisioning capability? I can create an incident response plan, but if I don't align and integrate it with how the organization does incident management, right, then we're going to end up crashing into each other when we try to actually do something that looks like an incident response. So you begin these journeys with the acknowledgement that whatever you're doing, you're putting a stake in the ground, and you're setting the stage for adaptation, right? You're going to establish certain capabilities, but none of these controls are ever done. So you're starting where you are, to the point that was made, I think, very appropriately earlier. And then you're kind of setting the cultural set around being able to adapt these capabilities continuously as you go.
Awesome. Jacob, what would you be looking at as far as starting the journey, your recommendations to the group?
Yeah, right now we are in an interesting, especially in DoD and federal government, we're in an interesting place where we have compliance requirements that are going to be driving a very interesting opportunity for small businesses, because oftentimes people don't want to do security unless they're forced to. So because we have to do this, we as security practitioners, we as engineers, or the leadership in the company have a real opportunity to allocate budgets, right? And then the security folks in those companies have a great opportunity to implement what I would say real security, not check the box, check the box. And then you miss all kinds of things that are just so obvious. And we had an interesting experience recently where we're going through the CISA incident response templates, right? They have all kinds of excellent free templates available for tabletop testing and stuff. And small cyber team, And we realized, wow, we are so in the weeds every day that we have to back off a bit and really think about what's critical, what are the really important assets. You know what I'm saying? And so I think this whole time where we have these compliance requirements driving the implementation of security is an excellent opportunity to build resilient organizations and really achieve those security outcomes that will benefit the business long term.
Awesome. Krista, you work with a number of organizations all over the state, large and small, different sectors, whatnot. What are you seeing out there in terms of folks taking an approach versus the checkbox method? And how would you recommend that organizations start to, move their program forward?
Yeah, so we talked to a bunch of different sectors, organizations in all sectors. We do just inherently have a closer relationship with public sector, which has been developed over the years. So I'll use school districts as an example. Across the board, we are seeing that there's just not enough cybersecurity professionals, particularly in that space, but certainly in other organizations as well. You have an IT group who were now charged with cybersecurity as well. And it's not that they've hired double the team. It's that maybe they've hired one person here and there, but they've added all of this responsibility onto that same team. So for them, it seems, at least for the discussions that we've had, is they want to do more, but they are doing all of this other stuff that they have to do day to day to keep everybody that availability side of the CIA triad. They're focused on that.
Yeah.
And then so the other areas kind of fall to the wayside until they can handle them. So, from our perspective, we're trying to offer more resources and services to them to augment that. But for a place to start, you need to figure out what you are doing, what you're not doing. Even a basic cybersecurity assessment, you say yes or no to these different control areas and figure out, well, you're not doing anything in this one control area. Maybe we need to do at least something there. So it's a good place to start where it's not so overwhelming. We have to do, speaking of CISA, they're great, but we have to do the NCSR every year, and it is comprehensive and it's a beast to complete. If you can just start with something a little bit more simple, then you can start to figure out, okay, well, we've looked at the areas of what's being targeted, what is the easiest to exploit. Let's start there. Where are we getting the most risk because we're not doing something, and then figure out how to get those resources.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, with our smaller clients, we typically look at cybersecurity essentials first. Are they doing that? But Rick, you talk a lot about risk, and Krista just mentioned it. So we're going through the organization and we're going through cybersecurity essentials, let's say, and we're just hitting those, key 12, 15 areas. And we're spending time with that. But then there's this threat that's going on that the company doesn't necessarily know about. The organization doesn't know about it. And we're spending so much time, trying to do the technology thing, and we're not paying attention to the risk. How does that whole risk management factor into the model that you were sharing?
Well, just to your point, Mike, I'm thinking about changing my first name from Rick to Risk, but that's that's the topic of a different conversation. But it's interesting. You're never gonna, no organization is ever gonna completely understand the threat landscape. I mean, because there's the internal, external, and then there's the threat landscape in general. But it's always going to be there, and it's always going to evolve. It's like a good business. They're always evolving. They're always being creative, and even though they're doing bad things, they're following the same rules of building a business.
Right.
So I think it's important for organizations. It's kind of putting in place, a system that will allow them to deal with change. All right, because change is the norm, and it could be good change, could be bad change. I mean, there's change is the new norm. So they really need to be able to feel comfortable that, based on what they know, and they only know what they know, they put in place the capabilities to protect what they know. All right, there's the unknown, and obviously you'll discover the unknown when someone successfully breaches your organization and creates, an incident that you have to deal with. The thing about building resiliency into your business is you'll have a way to deal with it. You'll have a way to get your systems back up online and be able to then look at the problem and figure out, well, why did it happen? Is there some update that I need to take care of here? Is there some control I need to put in here? Or is there some skill that I need to train my people on? So it really, cybersecurity is all about fear. It's a negative. It's a strong, strong negative that people, and I don't know about you, but I don't handle negative very well. I'm a very positive person, so I stay away from negative, right? But I think what we need to do, what organizations need to do, is to turn this negative into a positive, right? And that starts with the leadership and works its way down through the organization. In that we are a business. We all work together to deliver this value for our customers. Our customers remain loyal to us because we continue to innovate and deliver that value. So we as an organization need to do everything in possible to protect that value, right? And so, while it's all well and good being said, putting it into action is a different thing. All right. And this goes back to the cultural thing I talked about, all right, where, organizations, have established a culture that is, centered around protecting that value and putting in place the capabilities, including empowering people, all right, to not only do what they need to do to help protect that value, but coming up with ideas on how others can leverage their ideas to further protect that value. So it's really just it's a paradigm shift in thinking. And I know that sounds, super easy, but it's pretty hard to get people change. People do not like to change.
Yeah.
And so, and especially those who have lived in silos, I call them boxes. They've lived in these boxes. So their world is built around the view that they've created in those boxes. To look outside those boxes, they have no interest, right? So you got to get them to think differently, which has kind of been the main theme, for us from the beginning as we were doing this research is, man, we're going to have to really get folks to experience a paradigm shift in their thinking. And how do we do that? And so it's one of the reasons we created the publications and the trainings, because it takes people through that journey. And as Patrick will attest, since he's in the classroom, it's really interesting to watch the paradigm shift that people experience on day 3 of the program, where they now all the dots just connect in their head. So I think that's going to, that's the challenge, is turning cybersecurity from a negative into a positive, focus it around, the business and the business capabilities and the business value, and then really establish a culture that underpins that and supports that and allows that to be continually innovated. That's just the way I view it.
Awesome. 2 things. I want to have a question for Jill, but before I do, 2 things. One is, for our audience, we're really looking for folks to submit questions. We want to hear from you, and the panelists want to be able to answer your questions while they're available. You have access to industry experts. I would take advantage of it. So pass your questions. But before I go to Jill, Patrick, Rick mentioned something very interesting. He said the kind of the aha moment, day 3. You experience that on a regular basis. Please share that, what your observation is, and what is it that triggers that aha moment?
The biggest trigger is when people can see their organizations as interactive, complex systems, right? Where there are all these different interactions, where there are all these different organizational capabilities, and that the success of their cybersecurity approach has to be aligned with all that, right? Because most people bring a very iterative, how do I apply this control approach to implementing cybersecurity? And we understand why people do that. But the challenge, of course, is that that's context free of the capability that they're trying to successfully protect, right? Or the rest of the organizational capabilities that have to be able to execute and deliver on. And so by the time we get to that point in a NIST practitioner credentialing program, what happens is they start to see the interdependencies, and they start to see the web, right? And all of a sudden, there's an aha moment of, I have to think differently about this. I have to consider the perspective of my implementers, my users, my auditors, my external suppliers and partners. How do we engage all these different perspectives so we get a better understanding of not only what our goals and objectives are, but how do we measure success? And how will we ultimately set the table so that we can build adaptive capabilities so that we can respond to changes in vulnerabilities, changes in threat models, changes in the value of certain digital assets? so that we can continue to adapt in a way that allows us to do an ongoing kind of iterative approach to creation and protection of digital value.
That's awesome. And it kind of goes back to what Rick was saying earlier, the whole cultural thing. It sounds to me like if organizations are working in silos, this pulls them together. They begin to see the benefits to the overall business by working together. That's a great additional outcome.
It does. And it really, to a certain extent, requires just better visibility into how information flows through your organization.
Mm.
How does information flow through a work stream? How does information flow to and from your work stream? And how does this tie out to bigger things that matter,
Yeah.
right? That help your organization achieve objectives, operational and strategic, and that help the organization look at cybersecurity as part of the value proposition. So this becomes, especially you're trying to demonstrate your commitment to the protection of your customers' digital assets. At some point, it becomes less of a checkbox and more of a reason to choose you in the vendor bidding because you're taking their needs very seriously.
Good point. Jill, in your discussion, you talked a lot about the cost, the level of effort. What would you say are some of the caveats, some of the things you really need to be aware of, things that can help us as federal contractors be more successful, and any concerns that we should try to take into account?
Great question, and thank you for asking me that.
Well,
What the contract says is really the starting point. Once you identify your controlled classified information and then workflow it out, then you understand better who touches it, when they touch it, why they touch it, and the protection environment for that, for them receiving your CUI. Once you understand that, then you're able to assemble, an idea of all the physical security, the IT security, the vetting employees. You get a much better grasp of that. Then you'll be able to come up with a much better idea of how much everything costs. Because dealing with the Department of Defense and dealing with proposals, your costs really are the driver for your ability to win the next to win the next contract, and your ability to have enough profit to reinvest into your organization. So I would say that everything starts with understanding your contract, understanding your CUI, and understanding indirect costs and how much you can charge back to the government.
yeah, very helpful. So I got a question here from one of our participants. It's a two-part question. I'm going to start with Rick on this one. What are the training opportunities to prepare new practitioners versus management leadership?
All right. All right. Now you can hear me.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, at least what I can do is tell you about, the programs that the Institute has put together in that area. We've kind of broken, organizations down into three levels. We have, the mass population in the organization. So that's typically all the business professionals or anyone in an organization who doesn't really have a direct responsibility for, a cybersecurity program or a risk management program, but actually plays a role in that program. So in that particular instance, we put together an awareness program that, really teaches the fundamentals of the three things I mentioned earlier. What is digital? What are its risks? Why did the government spend a lot of time and effort building a standardized framework like the NIST CSF? And then what is your role as an individual in helping an organization, protect its value, its digital value? Very, very simple, real easy to get through, but it helps people, as Patrick pointed out earlier, kind of connect some of the early dots and why this is important and what their role is. Above that, the mid layer is really what we call a foundations or a fundamentals product. This takes, that audience on a much deeper dive. They actually may not only be a participant in the protection of the value, but also play a role within the organization as part of the strategy. All right. So you can get folks like your legal team, your cybersecurity team, your IT teams people who have to have a fundamental understanding. They're not the ones who are going to engineer it and be the practitioners, but they will play a more active role than just being an employee involved in, in protecting the value. Then there's the practitioner. So the practitioner, what we did there was we incorporated not only all aspects of how to build the DVMS system, but how to do that in the context of using the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, 2.0, as well as the NIST 853 informative reference. And we chose those two because the framework itself, it really identifies the 5 or now 6 core business functions you need to have in place to manage risk. All right. The ability to govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And so it's important for that to be factored into your DVMS strategy. And 53, and Jacob covered it perfectly. It's I call it the Bible of security and privacy controls. Everyone that could possibly be thought of, it's continually updated. So, we help people, as we take them through the training, learn how to converge these frameworks, how to select controls, and bring them into a situation where they deliver a specific set of outcomes, right? So those are trainings that will take you through the process of understanding cybersecurity and cybersecurity risk management and all of these informative references, including 171, and how to go about doing that in the context of a digital value management system. There are plenty other types of trainings out there as well from organizations like CompTIA and ISACA, ISC Square, that provide you some good fundamental trainings. They tend to be more technology focused, or in ISACA's case, more GRC focused, which is more probably in alignment with what we're doing.
Mhm.
Those are good places to start.
Awesome. Patrick, could you share your thoughts on the same?
Yeah, it's as Jacob alluded to in his discussion, the NIST cybersecurity framework isn't really for technicians. It's really for business leadership and business stakeholders. How do we make decisions about how we identify and prioritize investments and commitments in protection against digital risk? Right. And so the framework as it's laid out helps to describe outcomes that the organization needs to achieve in a business consumable way, right? So that the business stakeholders can have effective communications with cybersecurity professionals about digital risk, right? So the foundational program really talks about the framework itself, how you assess tiers, how you do profiling, and then how you use that as an input to making prioritization decisions and investment decisions, right? And then, of course, it gets into the weeds of what do we have to go do, right? And so the practitioner program, as the name implies, is really about what do you need to go do to actually execute and do the adaptations you need to do to be able to successfully carry out a cybersecurity risk management program. You need to understand how this cybersecurity framework works. But eventually, then the question becomes how do we deliver those particular subcategories or outcomes? And that really is driven into the informative references. And you can use different ones. You can use ISO 27001. You can use the CIS controls. You can use COBIT. The program that we are using leverages 853 because it's very adaptive and you can use other frameworks and plug and play those in if your particular organization happens to use a different set of control family.
Gotcha. Gotcha. But what I'd like each panelist to do as we close is just give your final thoughts, knowing that you're speaking to not only our audience that is present, but the audience that will see this in days to come. But just give kind of your final wrap up, words of encouragement, recommendations. And Krista, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Just closing out here, I think I just want everybody to understand that it seems like a really big problem, cybersecurity, making sure that we're maintaining our network security. And it is a big problem, but there are ways to address it. We don't have to do it all at once. You can do it one at a time. I think there is a line about eating the elephant one bite at a time. Love elephants, hate that line, but it does ring true. You can do it in steps. Having some security controls enabled, better than none at all. So as we continue to move forward, just keep that in the focus of your mind. Make sure everyone has a buy-in in why cybersecurity is important for your organization. If you don't understand why it is, you can just Google some news articles and you'll see. But I encourage everyone to take their own part, have that part of maintaining good cybersecurity practices.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Perfect. Jacob?
Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I would just say that when it comes down to the NIST 80171 CMMC conversation, this is really, it has to do with our national security, and so just keep that in mind throughout the world, and that marketplace that it's very competitive, right? And our adversaries are after our information, and also they're, as someone mentioned, that oftentimes we'll see cyber attacks where they won't actually physically attack, but they will do cyber attacks, and so that is a new area of warfare. So we as American businesses, smalls, mediums, large, we have to be prepared for that, and also protect our information and the resilience of our own businesses so that we can continue to operate and be profitable, and maintain that long-term existence in the competitive landscape of the capitalistic world.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. I would say, to wrap up, this is very doable. Defense contractors are able to implement the NIST 80171 and be competitive. Baseline your company's skill sets, understand your contract, understand your COI. With those two fundamental elements, you will be able to plan and strategize. And if you do this correctly, you will have an incredible competitive edge, because for every one company that is taking this seriously, that is seriously understanding the contract, and is seriously trying to implement the 171 and preparing for a CMC assessment, there's 5 companies that are not, at least minimum. So you will be able to position yourself with an incredible competitive edge just by following the foundations and following the advice of the other folks here. This is a tremendous amount of information and a lot of great ideas of moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. Rick?
For me, it's all about what I call the 4 C's. All right. But to Jill's point, organizations need to do it for themselves. The side effect of that is doing what the DoD requires, but it's about looking inside your organization and who are we and what competitive advantage do we have? What competitive advantage do we want? And to Jill's point, for everyone that is doing it, there are 5 that are not. So I think for me, as a business owner myself, I'd jump all over that as quickly as I possibly could. But in terms of my 4 C's, it all starts with culture. And I think in a small business, it's a lot easier to create a culture in a small business than it is in a large business, but they both need to be doing it. And so we need to establish, or management needs to establish, a culture that is focused around protecting that value and delivering and protecting that value. And so there's a way to get that to happen. And I think that's where they need to start. It also involves convergence. We have a lot of systems in place today that are doing independent things, but they need to come together in order to deliver a specific set of outcomes that are secure, resilient, and audible. I think we need to, clearly establish communication and collaboration pathways with all those responsible for the delivery of that service, especially our cloud providers, our MSPs, and other organizations that we work with to deliver these outcomes. All right. So it's really, really important. I'll leave you with this. This is not rocket science. It's once you have the right mindset and you're looking at things through the right lens, it's an exercise in engineering. It's really simple, something that a lot of these great engineers on this call today have the capabilities to go do. They just need to be thinking about it the right way.
Awesome. Thank you, Rick. Patrick?
Filling in with what the previous panelists have already shared, being agile and adaptive is not only the best route to protection, it's the best route to competitive advantage, right? Organizations that can embrace this approach, that can roll with the changes in vulnerabilities, in threat models, will outcompete in every industry. And so if you run an organization, if you have significant stakes in your organization's ability to create and maintain competitive advantage, right? The most fundamental part of that is really a change in mindset. None of us are omniscient. None of us have all the visibility into all the things. So it becomes about building effective feedback loops, learning and adaptation. And so by embracing this approach, you're setting yourself up for long-term success in competing for federal contracts, competing for any contract. So I just want to thank everybody for your time and energy taking part in these programs and listening to the different panelists. I hope that you're able to take that and drive that into your own benefits, to your own organization success.
That's awesome. Thank you, Patrick. You know, my closing comments before I thank all of you for joining me on this journey. Oftentimes when I'm talking to a partner, a client, and I'm getting that sense that they feel the compliance requirement is just that. It's a checkbox. It's just a requirements. And I ask them to listen to what I'm about to say through a filter. And that filter is our national security, the security of our infrastructure, the security of our national grid, the security of our food and water supply, the security of our small, medium-sized businesses, the security of our financial stability. Listen to what I'm about to say through that filter. If you're looking at the compliance requirements as the minimum, the lowest level of capability or functionality I need to pass the audit, as Rick would say, you're looking through the wrong end of the telescope. That is the absolutely wrong way to look at it. We've got to look at it as this is the least we have to do, but we've always got to be improving. We've always got to get better because our security is based on it.